There was a psychologist named Anton Boysen. Boysen, Boisen. He was an American, and he lived in the, I think his book that I read was written in the 30s, I believe, 20s or 30s. Maximum would be the 40s. And his book became the foundation of what's called clinical pastoral counseling. You guys might not know this, but the field of therapy is highly regulated in the U.S. You require a serious graduate level degree to be a therapist, social worker, or marriage and family therapist. It's a pretty well established and I want to say it's well accredited, but it's a field which requires a certain amount of accreditation to be able to do. That's why there's a whole life coach thing. It's like a little hack. You take a 6-week course, you become a life coach. And it almost sounds like you're a therapist. You're not. Therapist means, full undergraduate degree and a couple of years of graduate school. And not even any undergraduate degree. It has to be in a respectable enough field to be related enough to what you're eventually going to do. So Boysen was a psychologist, and he was a Christian. And I forget what denomination he was from. It's been almost 30 years since I read his book, 25 years since I read his book. But he had some type of Protestant Christianity, not Catholic, not Orthodox, one of the variations of Protestant Christianity. I want to say Presbyterian, because the Presbyterian church, they call their people pastors, but it's a clinical pastoral psychology. But it could be, there's other groups that call their priests pastors. So he wound up in the loony bin a few times. Now, that might not seem like such a big deal, but you know the whole Free Britney thing? Okay. So, it used to be that once you went to the loony bin, you didn't come out. It was a bit of a life sentence, because psychology didn't even really exist. I mean, they were doing stuff like pulling people's teeth out. Like they just pull out all your teeth, because they thought that was a solution. And so that was a theory for a while. So you go in there and they yank out all your teeth. You're looking at me like...
Why did they think that changed their mind, or was it so they wouldn't bite things?
No. It was as a cure for... There was some theory that cavities or some problem with your teeth is what caused mental health issues, maybe because of the proximity of your mouth to your head. Somebody was like, I notice a lot of people with poor mental health have bad teeth. So let's yank them out. I mean, women used to spray Lysol, to, avoid a sexually transmitted disease. There's all sorts of wacky stuff that went on in the fairly recent past all over the world in terms of physical. I mean, how about the wacky one that you should get circumcised? How about that one? That it's good for health, even though there's absolutely no evidence of that whatsoever. How about mutilate your children? Genital mutilation is the norm. It's weird if your genitals aren't mutilated. Even the Jews in Antioch in Turkey who converted to Judaism thousands of years ago, even they didn't have to get circumcised. It's like, it's cool, you can become a Jew without getting circumcised. Because they realized it was just, there's all sorts of funky stuff like that happened, so this is one of them. What to speak of lobotomies that went on until the 50s, 60s, 50s. They had a technique. They would just spike your brain and all your problems were over. There was one guy who performed thousands of lobotomies on people. That was just his go-to. You come to him, you're tripping out, spike your brain, send you home, doing the Thorazine shuffle permanently, no Thorazine required. He just lobotomized you. And then, of course, there's electroshock therapy, which is still currently used. But it's got a pretty high risk of inducing seizures. So they got a new one, TMS. You know about this?
Yeah, when you get hit by a car, you get these electric things.
That's totally different. That's muscle stimulation. It's a totally different ballgame, brother. TMS is they do this guy, I can't remember what it stands for, magnetic something, but it's magnetic stimulation, but they map your brain and they target the areas, but it's shock therapy, but really precision-based shock therapy. Shreve's actually taking a course in it right now. And with no risk of seizures or severely reduced risk of seizures. But they'd lock you up and you kind of never, there was a strong chance you never get out. And if you look at what happened to Britney Spears just 5 seconds ago, they just ended the conservatorship. I don't know if they ended the conservatorship, but they just got rid of the dad permanently. So they ended his conservatorship. I think she has a professional doing it now. But, they made her so she couldn't get pregnant. They gave her some kind of, intrauterine birth control device so she couldn't have a kid. They made her take lithium. They all paid themselves fat salaries. And they threatened to take stuff away and put her in a mental health facility if she didn't do whatever they said, which was go on tour and make money for her estate. That just happened. It just went to court. So it just got ended Friday or Thursday, like 2 days ago. So it used to be when you went into the hospital, a mental health hospital, it was like a freak show and a horror show, and they didn't really know what they were doing. They hadn't mapped out all the mental illnesses. They definitely didn't have treatments for them, and it was just like the Wild West. It was just a free for all. So he went in during that time, 3 times, and weird things happened, like where he would see crosses everywhere. But then he realized that the windows had, window panes, and then there was the glazing in between the window panes, and so that makes a cross shape. So you see a cross everywhere. He was like, okay, all right. So he had moments like that where he realized, I'm having a break from reality. I'm having some kind of schizoid break from reality. But he was smart enough where things would happen, and he realized, I'm crazy. I've lost it. I'm no longer seeing things clearly. Remember how we had an uphill battle? Yeah. I was trying to tell you all sorts of stuff, and you weren't buying it. And I was begging you, please believe me.
Pretty soon you're okay.
Yeah, that's when you know you're in bad shape. And I'm the spiders are talking to you. Come on, hold my hand. Let's get out of here. We'll talk about it later, yeah. We'll talk about those spiders and what they were saying to you later. Drug-induced hallucinations are a different animal because you stop the drugs and the hallucinations go away. But anyway, Boysen would realize at certain points that he was just having a break, some kind of psychotic break, and it would bring him back, and he would, get his way out. It happened several times. Then he finally wrote a book called The Cure of Souls, and it was his realizations from being in the field of psychology and actually going crazy a few times, and the dangers of what was going on in the mental health industry at that time, and specifically in mental hospitals in that time. And he was a super, super strict Christian. Like, he was a super strict Christian, celibate for life. Like, never married, celibate for life. And I think he had a couple of spontaneous ejaculations in his life that he actually writes about, like twice in his life. I can't remember what the circumstances were, how it happened, but he spontaneously orgasmed. He might have touched himself, or it just happened because he got so agitated it happened. But he wrote in his book about it. That's how honest and sincere he was in his Christianity, that the couple of terrible moments of breaks from absolute chastity that he suffered from in his life, he wrote about for all the world to see. Which gives you a sense of, how, at least with regards to chastity, how strict he was. So, he wrote a book called The Cure of Souls, which cure here is being used in an archaic sense to mean the care of souls. Not cure like you're cured, but cure in the sense of caring. It's more of an archaic usage of the term. It's actually a bit of a double meaning, because it can mean you're curing people, but it can also mean cure like you might cure meat or fish or something like that, or cheese, where you let it sit and it cures, and it's like you have to go through a process specifically to how to dehydrate it and remove water in a way that doesn't create mold and stuff like that. So it also kind of carries with it a few different possible meanings. But what it really means is the care of souls. So that's his book. And that book and his findings became the basis of clinical pastoral psychology, which is where priests weren't just playing it fast and loose like life coaches, but people actually went and got master's degrees, but within their religion. So it wasn't secular. So they weren't learning Freud or Skinner or even Maslow. And they weren't learning just the whatever the psychologist of the day was teaching, but they were learning within the jurisdiction or within the bosom of their chosen faith, but they were nonetheless becoming actual therapists. Do you follow this? You can get degrees in this. Clinical pastoral psychology, like Loyola Marymount, for sure offers degrees in clinical pastoral psychology. It's a master's program. And you become a therapist, and you also can quote the Bible. That's the idea. You become a therapist, and at the same time you're doing therapy for people who believe in God, who are part of your church, and you're able to minister to them as a priest, at the same time be a therapist. His work was so seminal that it became the foundation of that. It gave birth to that. So you guys follow this? All right. So anyway, he has a basic theory. And his basic theory is this. Something happened to you when you were a kid. And he doesn't get into all this detail, but if I just augment what he says a little bit. Your parents failed you. They didn't do a good job of teaching you that you were lovable. It happens without them saying anything, just by the way they act. You learn stuff. Kids are super sensitive. They pick stuff up. So somehow or other, you learn from your parents that you weren't lovable. That happened early on. He called those your early guides. Your early guides taught you wrong. And then you did stuff, or stuff was done to you. And you think if other people knew what you did or what was done to you, they wouldn't like you anymore. And he says this is what causes isolation, even if you're in a room full of people. And he talks about how much mental energy you have to spend to not think about the things that you're ashamed of. He doesn't use the word shame, but shame is a good word. Guilt is when you break your own values. Shame is when you break the values of society. Guilt is when you've done something wrong. Shame is when you are something wrong. There's different definitions. That's our super popular one, the last one I just said. Shame is feeling that I'm fundamentally inadequate. And usually people who overachieve and who are real successful, they have this the worst. So his theory was that your early guides, whoever they were, usually your parents, but it could be other people, taught you that their love was conditional. You then broke the rules that you thought were conditional for their love, and therefore you feel unlovable, and you go through life thinking if people knew what you'd done or what was done to you, they wouldn't like you, they wouldn't approve of you. Because social psychology teaches us that our thoughts and ideas are inherited from others, you then inherit that as your own self-talk and your own subconscious and your own conscience. And now you disapprove of and hate yourself because you think that's how other people would feel about you. And now you live a life where you are hiding from people. You can't open up to them. You don't tell people the full truth. You deceive other people. And that shield then makes you feel like if they did know, they wouldn't love you, which means you don't feel loved, which means the shield that protects them from knowing the truth about you also protects their love from getting in. And most people live their lives like that. Do you follow this? Anyway, the solution to the problem is you go and talk to people about the things you're most ashamed of in life. And when you see that they still love you and care about you, despite the fact that you have failed in your own eyes, when you see that you haven't failed in their eyes, then you change the way you look at the world, and they become your early guides, and you go through a process of therapy where you get new early guides, and those early guides teach you that you are lovable, and they help you to come to terms with the mistakes you've made and forgive yourself. You follow this? But that's not what most people do. Now we got to add something to this, because again, this was spiritual. We got to add something to this. And the thing we have to add to this is that for him, the purpose of human life is to love God and serve God with your whole heart and soul. Boysen was not a secular psychological theorist. He was a devout Christian. And so for him, the purpose of human life was very simple. It was to love God with your whole heart and soul and live every moment in chaste communion with the deity. You follow? Hence his incredible guilt complex about lust. Like an incredible guilt and shame he suffered that he had lust. So for him, the goal of life is to unburden yourself by talking about the things that you're ashamed about, till eventually you can talk about them with strangers, like him talking about his episodes of lust on the pages of his book as he's taken the role of a teacher. And then the other piece of the puzzle is that we should all decide that loving God with our whole heart and soul is the aim of human life. And that means that automatically, right away, immediately, you are a colossal failure. Once you make that your goal, that your ideal, that your value system, that I want to love God with my whole heart and soul, then immediately you fall short. Does that make sense? Your high value, your high ideal, your high goal itself then proves your lack of success and your failure, because you don't love God with your heart and soul, and now you embrace that as the ideal, and now once you embrace that as ideal, that very thing you've embraced as your goal becomes your judge and jury, and you've now failed. Does that make sense? Do you guys follow this? Like, imagine if you're like, okay, the only thing that matters to me is every time I flip the coin, it shows up heads. It doesn't work like that. It's not going to show up heads every time unless you get one of those trick coins. And so, like a two-headed coin. And so, after a couple of flips, it's going to go tails. And if that's what you decided, then it's guaranteed you're gonna feel like a failure. So usually we're like, hey, stop trying to control the outside world, just control yourself. But that wasn't his game. His game was pick the highest thing to live for, and that's you should live a life in absolute servitude to God. This, of course, is why my gurus liked his book and why we studied his work. Because he got this one right. He discovered the universal principles of therapy, and he also discovered the universal principles of spiritual failure. And he merged them together, which is just like nothing short of brilliant. So the universal principles of therapy, you share and somebody tells you you're good enough. But, then it's like, okay, you overeat or you are, loose in some of your behavior or you're not perfect or whatever. No big deal. It's one thing to be forgiven and just told, okay, whatever you do is okay. But how about if you now have this massively high standard, this massively high ideal? Now, if you don't give that up and just say whatever you're doing is good enough, now there's legitimate grounds for you to feel like a failure. Not because of what your early guides mistaught you, not because of the things you did or the things that were done to you as a kid, but because you've now embraced an ideal and then you fall short of it and now you're going to feel like a failure and spend your whole life feeling like a failure. You follow this? Are you guys paying attention? Making sense? So then, Boysen's, his program was, you never give up your ideal. And you learn to live with the guilt of falling short. And you learn how to use that guilt to motivate you to do better. And you climb the mountain every day for the rest of your life and you never give up. But nobody can do that because it's too demanding. Nobody wants to feel like a failure all the time. So what do? You go and become a family man. And you're like, I might not be a pure devotee, but I'm a good husband and father. Or you become rich. I might not be a pure devotee, but I've made it. I own my own home. I own several homes. I'm successful. I'm educated. You follow? I have lots of friends. I'm popular. I have an interesting career. I'm living my best life. I'm social. I look good. Better than you. I'm tougher than you are. I'm stronger than you are. I'm more thuggish than you are. I'm more well-spoken. Boysen's realization was nobody can stand in the light of their failure to God. And so they end up settling for something lower in life because to hold on to that ideal means they live their whole life as a failure over and over and over again. And people just don't have the stomach for it. So instead, they find some lesser thing. You follow? Now, if you look at the world is filled with people with lesser things as their value system. I was a virgin when I got married. I'm from a better family. I was born in the Hare Krishna movement. I got a full head of hair. I have a college education. I graduated summa cum laude. I have a graduate degree. I have a higher IQ. I'm bigger, faster, stronger. I'm more famous, more well-known. I'm cooler. I got more style. I spin better rhetoric. I play better mridanga. I sing better. I play better harmonium. I live in a nicer house. I got more money. I got a cooler job. Think about it. Everybody spends their life finding some lower value, some lower ideal that they can live up to. Because to actually make it your life's job to be a pure devotee is just, it's too much. And so the world is, so this is like C.S. Lewis wrote this book, Mere Christianity, where he said, I'm sick of meeting Christian philanthropists and Christian activists and Christian scientists and Christian doctors. When will I meet somebody who just, when they meet me, they just tell me I'm Christian and that's it. Mere Christianity. Where Christian isn't something that gets attached to what you really are. It is what you really are and you're nothing else. Did you follow this? Boysen was talking about the same thing. So, Boysen's theory has sort of two aspects to it. On one side, Boysen's theory is that your early guides failed you, taught you were unlovable because of what happened to you or what you did, and therefore the process of therapy is to go and find somebody in this, lonely planet and tell them all your secrets because you spent a bunch of energy hiding them in the back of your brain and they never go away and eventually they bubble up and that's insanity. Because you can't keep them down, they boil up, and that's how it boils up into addictive behaviors and coping mechanisms, and eventually psychotic breaks because people cannot deal with the pain that they're holding in and that they're hiding in the back of their mind, and it's never that far from their consciousness. And therefore the process is to find somebody, and the therapist has to be totally expert at digging in and figuring out what exactly is bothering you by asking you the heaviest possible questions to figure out really what's bothering you, reading between the lines, getting really good at recognizing diversionary tactics and tells and becoming an expert investigator. And then helping you to get it all out and then loving you despite all of your flaws. And then you learn from him how you should think about yourself. That's the essence of therapy, as far as I can see. Came from a guy. His name's Boysen. Then on the other side, he had this radical spirituality where the goal of life is to love God with your whole heart and soul every moment of every day, 24/7. And if you don't do that, you're a failure. And nobody can handle being a failure. It's too intense. And therefore they find a lower ideal that they can live up to, and nobody makes it as a Hare Krishna. Because it's just too much. And so eventually your material desires and your inability to be a success and your dislike of just perpetual failure and having to live with that kind of humility and crawl and beg and pray and slither and pick yourself up unlimited times to just move towards the goal forever without ever enshrining another ideal and always being faithful to that ultimate ideal of pure devotion. It's just too much for people. And so what do? They become the most gregarious, the most cool, the most rich, the most wealthy, the most famous, the most likable, the best husband, the best wife, the best parent, the coolest job, the best pictures on social, the coolest hobbies. Because they want a gold medal in something. And gold medals in pure devotion take an entire lifetime to get. You still might not make it. And Boysen's goal in his little tiny book, Cure Souls, I doubt it's even still in print. I have a copy, but I doubt it's even still in print. I mean, the copy I got, I don't even know how I got a copy. It wasn't in print when I got a copy. The goal of Boysen's book is to encourage his Christian brethren to never give up the ideal of loving Jesus with their whole heart and soul. And to just learn to thrive even though you've embraced an ideal, which means you're never going to be able to pull it off. You're just going to move from failure to failure with no loss of enthusiasm. Because your ideal judges you. Once you have an ideal, if you don't live up to it, that ideal now stands in judgment of you, and you picked it yourself, so you got nobody to thank but yourself. Nobody wants to feel that way, so they pick some other ideal. You follow this? So I was thinking about this, and I was thinking how Krishna himself says that, there's a few points, but one thing is that Krishna says that if you want to, at the very beginning of the Gita, he says, if you want to practice bhakti, if you want to practice yoga, you have to have a vyavasayatmaka buddhi, eka. You have to have one pointed, fixed, determined intelligence. You have to pick something as your goal and then settle for no substitutes. And just accept no substitutes. Krishna himself says, I give liberation and wealth and fame very easily, but pure devotion I do not give. In fact, Krishna says that he'll give you those other things in lieu of pure devotion to see if you'll take the consolation prize and not keep bugging him for pure devotion. And so the devotee, when Krishna offered Prahlad, he offered him anything he wanted. And Prahlad said, I'm your servant, you're my master, please don't sully our relationship by offering me material benedictions. And if you want to offer me a benediction, offer me the benediction that I never ask you for anything. And at the Mahaprakash, Kolavesha Sridhar, one of our great devotees, the Lord offered him anything he wanted, the 8 mystic perfections, unlimited riches and wealth. Kolavesha Sridhar said, my only goal in life is I get to see you every day. Haridas Thakur was offered by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He said, just allow me to die while looking at you, that's enough. Bhishma waited for months to die while he could look at Krishna. Our whole lineage, Sudama was given fabulous wealth, but he still lived a simple life of devotion. Wasn't willing to ask Krishna for anything. If you look at the defining feature of devotees through the centuries and millennia, it's that devotees refuse to accept any substitute. They just want Krishna, and they turn down material things. Because they really want Krishna. So they turn away from lust, they turn away from greed, they turn away from anger, they turn away from materialism in all of its shapes and sizes and forms, because they're really devout to Krishna, and they really want Krishna, and they're really focused on Krishna, because that's their ideal. And they put blinders on, and they go through the world with rose-colored glasses, where they're just looking for Krishna. What that fundamentally looks like, that beautiful poetic ideal, what it looks like is you have to start following the regulative principles. You have to start chanting your rounds. You have to start behaving all the time like you would if your gurus and Krishna were looking at you. It's not just like an idea, like, oh, I'm just always looking for Krishna. Moment to moment throughout your life, you're confronted with all sorts of ways you can indulge in materialism or take the high road. Every one of us, in our thought process, but to speak of our words and actions on a daily basis, is confronted with opportunities to fall short, to be selfish. If you really love Krishna, if you really want Krishna, then every time those opportunities come up, you take the high road. And when you don't, you feel really bad about it, and then take the high road. You follow? And that's your life forever. Always turning towards the light, never turning towards the darkness. And when you turn towards the darkness, picking yourself back up and turning back towards the light again. It's not some sort of Victorian, you're going to go to hell thing. It's more just, we really need to show Krishna that we want him and nothing else. And what people do is they end up finding, even the idea of ritual, even ritual within a religion becomes a way of not embracing the ideals of the religion, but by embracing the external manifestations of those ideals in the form of ritual. And then the ritual replaces the ideal instead of being a byproduct of the ideal. And now people think, if I do the ritual, I've done the religion. Whereas the ritual was always a way to convey your internal state and to express your internal state. You follow? Like an artist takes paints and a brush and then makes art, but the art is coming from him, and the paints and brush are simply a medium. The ritual becomes a medium to express your artistic love for God. And if all that's left is you just putting paint on a brush and like you just rubbing the brush without any actual from your heart art coming, it's not art. It's like the ritual minus the mood, minus the devotion. What to speak of, most people aren't even that pious where they become ritualists. Most people just go ahead and become materialists. They spend 5 minutes with us. We teach them a bunch of great ideals. They spend the rest of their life trying to forget them. Because they haunt you. Because they transform you. Because if you let this kind of stuff seep in, it weighs on you and it forces you to do the right thing and to transform your life. So Boysen discovered two things. Number one, he discovered the essence of therapy. And I explained that. Opening up to somebody and unburdening yourself so it doesn't sit like undigested food festering in your mind, requiring incredible amounts of energy to not think about. And opening up and being vulnerable and then learning how to be loved and eventually learning how to love yourself. That's one side. Absolutely brilliant. I've never read anybody say it better. I've read tons of books on therapy. I've never heard anybody say it better than Boysen did in like the 30s or 40s. Number two, love God with your whole heart and accept no substitutes. And spend your entire life like fighting to never give up your ideal. And so Krishna at the outset says, you need to have this one point of focus. Arjuna says it's more difficult than controlling the wind. Krishna says, without a doubt, it's more difficult. You can still do it by abhyasa and vairagya, by dispassionate practice. Just got to put your nose to the grindstone for your entire life. Just never go home, never quit, never give up, stick it out. A lot of people think becoming a Navy SEAL is a big deal, or becoming this or that's a big deal. What's a really big deal is loving Krishna. Because there's no cheat, there's no weekends off, there's nothing. It's a full commitment from your entire life to the ultimate, highest possible ideal that a human being could ever imagine. The all-good, all-loving deity. There is, philosophically speaking, there is no higher ideal. Somebody could deny that God exists. That's a separate argument. But the point is, in terms of what can be conceived of, what could be more beautiful of a goal than devoting yourself to selflessly loving the all-good, all-loving source of all reality? There's no higher ideal. It's actually the greatest higher purpose, higher cause that's ever been considered, ever in the history of human thought. And then you got to spend the rest of your life trying to live up to it. And failing. Over and over and over again with no loss of enthusiasm, and you just got to keep practicing. That's the dispassion and practice. Abhyasa and vairagya, which is actually Patanjali says it. That's what yoga is. Abhyasa and vairagya. Practice and renunciation. Practice and dispassion. And Krishna says you got to go into it with this one point of intelligence. And at the end of the Gita, it's the same thing. Mame kam sharanam braja. Just do one thing, surrender to me. Just do one thing, take shelter of me. That's it. That's the goal of human life. There's nothing else. And so if you look through the Gita, this same principle is there. Why? Because it's a universal principle of spirituality. That once you accept that God exists, then the goal of life becomes to love God, and everything else falls short. Everything else is a waste of time. Everything else is pathetic and trivial and just a waste of time and effort. There's been two Vaishnavas in my life. where I slept. When I was a monk. I slept on the floor next to my guru's bed, and I would hear them chanting while they slept. 2 Vaishnavas I've seen do this. I've heard about it happening with 1 or 2 others, but I've personally witnessed it with two devotees, where they slept in the middle of the night while they're sleeping, they're chanting. I've also lived with great devotees who the whole day, they're just doing service. And they're like, oh wow, it's been a long day, I need to take a break. And I'm like, okay, Maharaj, like, you just do your thing, chill out, relax, like, can I get you something? And they're like, yeah, I need to relax, I need to unwind. Why don't you read some Chaitanya Charitamrita to me? Or like, I'm going to sit in meditation on Krishna for a few minutes. And like, that's their downtime. Or I'm really going through a hard time. I really need to I get into some japa. Like my mind's disturbed, or I'm really going through a hard time in life. Like things are real tough. I really need japa because that's my coping mechanism. That's what I go to when things are really tough, and I really feel like I'm like out of control and I'm spun. My go-to for coping in life is japa. That might not seem like a big deal because everybody's like, I got to chant a couple of rounds. But just think about that that's actually your go-to. Not that you have a responsibility to chant rounds and then you also think about lust, anger, and greed. That it's always the go-to is japa. You follow? So we're not kidding. We got an ideal. The ideal is be a pure devotee. That's your goal. By the time you die, all you're doing is thinking about Krishna. Which means that you got to spend your whole life learning the art of always thinking about Krishna. There's no higher ideal. Boys can figure that one out. And psychologically, it sucks, and you're going to want to find a lesser thing to devote yourself to. And I mean, the world is so filled with Hare Krishnas who get married, or worse, fall away from their practice. And then when you hit them up, and you're like, oh, it sounds like you're having a rough time. They're like, I'm a good parent. I'm quite successful. Let me tell you how successful I am. And they just replaced the highest goal with a minor virtue because it got too hot. It was too difficult. And so being a devotee really consists of, for the rest of your life, never giving up that ideal. No matter what life throws at you and what you go through and how many difficulties you have, never give up the ideal. My purpose is to love Krishna. The greatest thought in the history of humanity is to love God with your whole heart. It's the highest ideal that's ever been conceived of. I'm going to enshrine that in my heart, spend the rest of my life worshiping it, even if I never get it right. And that act, that voluntary and willful permanent act, changes the fabric of reality. It changes the universe in which you live, and a portal opens up, and your life can become a smashing success, and you can love Krishna in this lifetime. You just have to embrace that ideal, and then let the ramifications of that ideal seep into your bones and haunt you forever. One of my guru's favorite poems, English poems, because that's my guru, I appreciate English poetry, is miles to go before I sleep. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have many promises to keep. Miles to go before I sleep. That we're on a journey and we need to just keep moving forward. And there might be all sorts of fun roses to smell along the way, but we have some great, amazing, miraculous thing that we're moving towards, and we're not going to stop. And if you think about the Odyssey, it's like the whole, like the siren call, the sirens, right? And the lotus eaters, and like these, like the various people that Odysseus, thank you. The various people that Odysseus met on his journey, they were distractions from the goal. Tempting with luxury and laxity and laziness, that's the lotus eaters. And lust, that's the sirens. And it's not like a Victorian thing, like we hate sin and it's evil and there's a devil. It's not like that. It's just we want Krishna. And so it's just real simple. You want Krishna? You want to see Krishna? It's real simple. Every day for the rest of your life, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for just one lifetime. I have said that long. You have to love Krishna and practice loving Krishna, and then you'll love Krishna and you'll eventually see Krishna. That's the way it works. I mean, if you actually think about it, like to see the origin of all existence, like that's my goal. To have to give one lifetime for that, 24/7, that doesn't sound like too much. It sounds like a super good deal. We just have to embrace that idea, embrace that ideal, embrace that virtue, set our sights on that, install that in the shrine of our hearts, make that our goal, and move through life without ever forgetting it. And constantly get back up and live as a failure, having embraced the greatest goal. The embracing of that goal makes you better than anybody else on the planet. Krishna says to even be interested in spirituality makes you above everybody else. That itself is a victory. And so if you really if you think about it, like theology at some point becomes thinking about the nature of God and just contemplating it, sitting with it. Would an all-good, all-powerful deity ever make it that we couldn't make our life a success? No, he wouldn't. Would we always have success at our fingertips? Yeah, we would. Could he make the world like that? Sure. Does this world seem like that? It sure does. Our free will certainly seems like we were endowed with the ability to always turn towards divinity. Maybe not a specific conception of divinity, that's fine, but turn towards divinity. Is there amazing stuff all around us? Yeah, consciousness, amazing forces that govern reality that indicate there is a higher power. Is it possible to naturally come to the idea that there's a God? Absolutely. Even on a desert island? Yes. And so you think about it, would Krishna ever make me out of the race for good? No. Would he ever want something from me I couldn't give? No. Would he want anything more than my love? No, he wouldn't. Would it be possible for me to fully satisfy the deity just through my love? Absolutely. Would he even be interested in anything else? No, he wouldn't. Would if I was just sincere and I embraced this as my ideal, would he help me along the way? Of course he would. Do we see him doing that in the lives of devotees? Yes. If you go on the spiritual path, will you see Krishna doing it in your life? Yes. How long does it take? Not very long. We just got to really think about it. Really make this our ideal. Really make this our goal. And then spend the rest of our lives living up to the goal we set for ourselves without ever putting it down. So take your time, figure out your goal. Take your time and realize this is the goal. And then spend the rest of your life living up to it. And spend the rest of your life, well, I can't live up to it. Okay, then spend the rest of your life trying to live up to living up to it. Spend the rest of your life trying to meditate on always wanting to meditate on it. Can't own it? Okay, then put it on an altar in your heart and worship the ideal. Can't do that? Okay, then put put the idea of worshiping on the altar of your heart, in your heart, and then worship the idea of worshiping it, and someday you'll make that yours. It doesn't matter. Just however many steps back you need to take to make it comfortable, and then but it all roads lead to Rome. If you embrace the idea that you should embrace the idea that you should serve Christian with your whole life, you're there. It'll just take a little bit of time for you to start to cut away at the degrees of separation until all of a sudden you've embraced the notion that you should love God with your whole heart. Can't do it? Great. Feel bad about it and stand back up again and try again. Tell people about it. Tell people about your failures. Be sincere enough not to let them own you and pull you away. These two ideas, Boyesen articulated in a lot of ways the essence of spirituality and its main competition in the form of lesser goals, and the essence of therapy and the main obstacle, which is our lack of desire to open up our hearts. And strangely, we embrace as the cure, hiding the very thing which crushes us. Okay. Thank you very much for joining us, IGTV, Facebook.